I need to start with a number. The number is $214,000. Give or take a few $100. I stopped tracking somewhere in year 4, because tracking it precisely had started to feel like something I was doing to punish myself, and I was already carrying enough weight without adding a running ledger of my own generosity to the pile. $214,000. Spread across 7 years. Distributed quietly, without contracts or conditions or family meetings where someone said the word repayment and meant it. Distributed the way water distributes itself, finding the lowest point and filling it, because the lowest points kept appearing and I was the only person in my family who had anything resembling water to give. I'm going to tell you what I got for it. But first I'm going to tell you who I am, because that part matters for the story to make sense. My name is Claire. I'm 38. I'm the middle child of 3, which means I grew up in the peculiar position of being neither the oldest nor the youngest, neither the one with the authority nor the one with the excuse. The middle is, in most families, the one who learns to manage the distance between the other two. The one who reads the room fastest. The one who absorbs. I absorbed a lot. My brother Daniel is 41. He has the particular confidence of men who have been told their whole lives that their instincts are correct and their failures are temporary and their potential is significant. He's been saying his potential is significant for about 20 years now, which is as long as he's been starting businesses that don't last and making promises he amends rather than keeps. He is charming in the way that makes it easy to forgive him the first time and the second time and, if you're not paying attention, the 15th time. I was paying attention. I forgave him anyway. That's on me. My sister Natalie is 34. She is the baby of the family in the way some youngest children are their whole lives, not in the sense of being coddled, exactly, but in the sense of having learned very young that helplessness, performed correctly, is a form of power. Natalie has been in the middle of a crisis for as long as I've known her, which is her entire life. The crises are real. Some of them are genuinely hard. The pattern of who gets called to resolve them is the part that's worth examining. That person was me. Always me. Since I was 25 and landed my first real job with a real salary, the answer to every financial emergency in my family had been me, and the thing about being the answer is that eventually everyone stops looking for other answers because they already know this one. Here's what I want you to understand about how this started, because it didn't start with exploitation. It started with love, which is how most of these things start, and that matters. I was 25 when my mother got sick. Not catastrophically, not in the way that makes everyone rearrange their lives at once, but sick enough that she couldn't work for 8 months, and the 8 months stretched to 14, and the medical bills accumulated the way medical bills do in this country, not because the illness was particularly unusual, just because the system is designed to turn ordinary illness into financial emergency for anyone who isn't already financially secure. My mother was not financially secure. She'd raised 3 children largely on her own after my father left, and she'd done it with more grace than the situation probably deserved, but grace doesn't accumulate in a savings account. She had almost nothing set aside. The bills were not nothing. I paid them. $6,000 over 14 months, spread across installments I timed to my own paycheck cycle. I didn't tell Daniel or Natalie. I didn't tell my mother the full amount, just that I was handling some things, that she didn't need to worry, that she should focus on getting well. She cried the first time I said it. I told her not to. She did anyway. That was the first $6,000. It felt like love. It was love. The problem with establishing yourself as the person who handles things is that it becomes structural. Not because your family is malicious, not yet, not at first, but because humans organize themselves around what works, and what worked in that first crisis was calling Claire. So that's what they kept doing. By the time I was 28, I had paid my mother's property taxes twice, co-signed a loan for Daniel's second business, the one after the first one that had also not worked out, and covered 3 months of Natalie's rent when she lost a job and couldn't cover the gap herself. None of these felt like emergencies in the classic sense. Each one felt manageable. Each one came with gratitude that was real and warm and full of the specific phrases that make a person feel like what they've done was noticed and valued. I don't know what we'd do without you, Claire. You're the strongest one in this family, you know that? We'll pay you back. I mean it this time. I want to be honest about how those phrases land when you're 28 and still working out who you are and what your place in your family is. They land well. They make you feel like the thing you're doing, quietly absorbing financial pressure so that the people you love don't have to, is a form of being good at something. Being the capable one. Being the one who shows up. They are not wrong that it's a form of capability. They are very wrong about what it costs. By 30, I was making good money. Better than good. I'd been promoted twice in 3 years, I was living in a one-bedroom apartment I liked, I had a small but real savings account that I contributed to every month and drew from with some regularity when the family calls came. I was dating someone who thought I was generous and supportive and occasionally slightly too available to my family's needs, and who was right about all three of those things. The calls had, by 30, taken on a rhythm that I could set a calendar to. Natalie's crises tended to peak around the end of the month, when rent was due or a bill had been ignored long enough to become urgent. Daniel's tended to come in clusters, a stretch of 3 or 4 months where everything was fine, then a concentrated period of emergency that usually involved a business decision that hadn't gone the way he'd projected. My mother's needs were steadier, smaller on average, and always came wrapped in apology that I'd long since stopped needing but that she couldn't seem to stop offering. I had started, by 30, to think of myself as a support structure. Not a person who happened to help her family sometimes, but a load-bearing element in an architecture that had been designed around my ability to bear load. The distinction matters. A person who helps sometimes can stop. A load-bearing element cannot stop without the structure coming down, and I had become incapable of letting the structure come down. This is not a virtue. I want to be clear about that, because the story is easier to tell if I'm only a victim in it, and I was not only a victim. I participated in the construction of this system. I kept showing up. I kept answering the phone. I kept finding reasons why this particular emergency was real enough to justify the help, and then I kept not having the harder conversation about the pattern those emergencies made when you laid them end to end. I kept choosing the easier thing, which was to pay, over the harder thing, which was to stop. I did that for 7 years. Let me give you the full accounting, because I think it's important to say the numbers plainly. Not to perform the scale of it, but because there is a particular kind of invisibility that happens when money moves in a family without being named, and I'm done with invisibility. Daniel, $89,400. Across the co-signed loan that defaulted and that I paid off rather than let destroy my credit, 2 direct transfers when his third business was collapsing, 6 months of his car payments when he lost his license, and a series of smaller amounts I'd classify as bridge loans that neither of us ever bridged. Natalie, $61,700. Across 9 years of intermittent rent coverage, a medical bill from an emergency room visit she hadn't had insurance for, moving costs 3 separate times when she left apartments under circumstances that ranged from complicated to she was asked to leave, and roughly $12,000 in what I can only describe as general crisis maintenance, smaller amounts, $200 here, $500 there, that accumulated in the ledger I stopped keeping in year 4. My mother, $62,900. Mostly the early medical bills and the property taxes, but also, over the years, a car repair, a heating system that failed in February, a roof that was not going to survive another winter, and a series of expenses related to her health that she had not budgeted for because the margin in her budget for unexpected expenses was effectively zero. Total, $214,000. Across 7 years. From one salary. From a person who was also paying her own rent and her own bills and making her own retirement contributions and trying, in the margins of all of this, to build something resembling a life of her own. The video was on Natalie's Instagram. She'd posted it at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening, which meant she posted it while I was still awake, which means she either didn't think about that or she did think about it and posted it anyway. The second option, I've come to believe, is more likely. It was a family gathering. Natalie's apartment. I recognized the couch she'd bought with money I'd helped her move into that apartment, the specific shade of a throw pillow she'd texted me about for 45 minutes while I was at work. Daniel was in the frame, sitting with a beer, and 2 of their friends I'd met maybe 3 times total were there as well, and everyone was in the relaxed, slightly loud mode of a group of people who have been together for a few hours and have forgotten to perform themselves. This is the state in which people say the things they actually think. The video was 17 minutes long. I didn't know it was 17 minutes when I started watching. I found out when I'd finished watching all of it and sat very still for a moment and then went back and watched it again to make sure I had heard what I thought I'd heard. I had heard what I thought I'd heard. I'm going to tell you what was said, plainly, without softening it. Because I spent 7 years softening things, and the softening was part of the problem. 12 minutes in, one of the friends, a woman named Becca who I'd never personally disliked, asked Daniel about his sister. Not me. Natalie. They were already talking about Natalie. Natalie was sitting right there. The friend meant his other sister. The question was something like, whatever happened to your middle sister, the one who lives downtown? Daniel said, oh, Claire. Yeah. She's fine. Same as always. He made a gesture I can only describe as dismissive, not cruel, just the gesture of someone who finds the subject mildly tedious. She's still doing that job? Becca asked. Yeah, Daniel said. Same job. Same apartment. Same everything. She's kind of, he paused, looking for the word. She's kind of a pathetic failure, honestly. Like she had every opportunity and she just didn't do anything with it. The table laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a comfortable one, the laugh of people who have heard a familiar assessment confirmed by someone who ought to know. Natalie said nothing. This is the part one keep coming back to, even now, Natalie said nothing. She laughed a little. The same small laugh you might produce if someone said something you weren't sure you agreed with but weren't going to spend political capital disagreeing with either. She didn't say, Claire has paid $60,000 into our lives, Daniel. She didn't say, maybe don't describe our sister that way. She didn't say anything at all. She just laughed, small and comfortable, and the conversation moved on. I watched the video twice. Then I closed my laptop and sat in my apartment, in the dark, for approximately 20 minutes. I want to be precise about what I felt during those 20 minutes, because it wasn't what I expected to feel, and the gap between what I expected and what I actually felt is where this story turns. I expected to cry. I have cried over smaller things, over a careless comment in a text, over a birthday forgotten, over the slow accumulation of small unreturned kindnesses that most people absorb and dismiss but that I, apparently, had been quietly cataloging for years. I expected the video to break something open. It didn't. What happened instead was closer to clarification. The particular sensation of a picture that has been slightly blurry for 7 years suddenly coming into precise, perfect focus. Not because the video told me something I didn't know, I knew, on some level, all of it. But because seeing it said out loud, casually, at a table where no one thought to push back, stripped away the last of the generous interpretations I'd been wrapping around my family's behavior like insulation. Pathetic failure. Same job. Same apartment. Same everything. Didn't do anything with it. Said about the person who had, in the 7 years since she landed that same job, quietly transferred $214,000 into their lives. Said with comfort. Said with the ease of people who have held an opinion for a long time and have never had reason to question it, because the person it was about had never once required them to. I need to pause here and say something about the phrase, pathetic failure, because it deserves examination, not just as an insult but as a specific data point. What Daniel described as failure was, in fact, stability. I had the same job because the same job was good, it had promoted me twice, it compensated me well, it allowed me the financial capacity to support an entire extended family for 7 years while also saving and investing and building the kind of financial foundation that doesn't photograph well on Instagram but that real adults understand as the actual measure of whether a life is working. I had the same apartment because the same apartment was mine, fully mine, with nothing owed on it except monthly rent I'd never once been late on, in a building I'd chosen carefully, in a neighborhood I'd stayed in because I liked it and not because I hadn't thought to leave. Same everything, in Daniel's accounting, meant, no dramatic pivots. No businesses launched and failed. No cross-country moves funded by someone else's credit. No crises that required other people to rearrange their finances around my emergencies. He had mistaken the absence of chaos for the absence of ambition. He had also, apparently, forgotten that I was the reason he still had a credit score. I opened a spreadsheet the next morning. Not to wallow, to organize. There's a specific kind of anger that doesn't want to shout, it wants to be accurate. That's the kind I had. I tracked everything I could remember, going back to the beginning. Some of it I had records for, bank transfers, loan payment confirmations, the promissory notes I'd drawn up once or twice and then never enforced because enforcing them felt like not trusting family, and I was still, at that point, optimistic about what that word meant. Some of it I reconstructed from memory, and I was conservative in my reconstruction, rounding down whenever I wasn't certain, because I didn't want to be wrong about a single number. The total, when I'd finished, was $214,000. Give or take a few $100s. I sat with the spreadsheet for a while. I printed it out, which is not something I do often. I am not a print things out person, but I printed this and I put it in a folder, and I put the folder on my kitchen table, and I looked at it while I had my coffee that morning, the same way you might look at a document that needs a signature, something formal, something that requires a decision. I made the decision. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I didn't send the spreadsheet. I didn't compose a long message explaining what I was about to do and why, didn't write the letter I'd been composing in my head for approximately 4 years about what it had cost me to keep saying yes. I had spent 7 years explaining myself into compliance, and I was done explaining. I logged into my bank and I removed Daniel and Natalie from my emergency contacts. I canceled the standing transfer I'd set up to supplement my mother's grocery budget, $150 a month, which had been running for 3 years, which I would address differently and more carefully than the others, because my mother was not Daniel, was not Natalie, and deserved to be handled with the precision that distinction required. Then I sat back in my chair and felt the absence of something I'd been carrying so long I had forgotten it had weight. I should tell you about the standing transfer to my mother separately, because conflating her with Daniel and Natalie would be both inaccurate and unfair. My mother had not laughed at that table. My mother had not called me a pathetic failure or sat by while someone else did. My mother had, in fact, always known what I was doing and had always, every time, expressed something that looked genuinely like regret that she needed it, not performed regret, but the real kind, the kind that comes from a person who would rather be self-sufficient and knows she isn't. The difference between taking and accepting is the same as the difference between entitlement and gratitude, and my mother had always been in the gratitude column, even when the circumstances made her a recipient rather than a giver. I didn't cut off my mother. I restructured. I called her, not to tell her about the video, not yet, not that morning, because the morning was mine and I needed to keep it controlled, but to tell her that the standing transfer was going to stop, and that I wanted to talk about what she actually needed and what we could actually build together, on transparent terms, with honesty instead of quiet generosity that neither of us was fully naming. She cried. I had known she would. I told her I wasn't abandoning her. I told her I was trying to do this right rather than just do it endlessly. She said, "Did something happen?" "I'll tell you soon," I said. "Right now I just need you to know that I love you and I'm not going anywhere. I'm just changing some things." She said that was all right. She said she'd been afraid, for a long time, that this was costing me more than I let on. She said she was sorry. I told her not to be. I meant it. Daniel called on a Thursday. 11 days after the video, 9 days after I'd moved the money, 6 days after Natalie had texted asking if I was okay because I'd been quiet, an observation that might have landed differently if I hadn't recently watched her laugh at a dinner table while someone described me as a pathetic failure. I let Daniel go to voicemail. This was not avoidance, it was preparation. I had spent 11 days getting ready for this conversation, not by planning speeches or rehearsing arguments, but by letting the clarity I'd found in that spreadsheet solidify into something structural. Something I could stand on. He left a message. Breezy, the way Daniel always was, his tone rarely registered the seriousness of a situation until the situation had fully collapsed around him, and sometimes not even then. He said he was calling to catch up. He said it had been a while. He said to call him back when I had a chance. He did not say, "I need money." He didn't have to. 11 days is, in Daniel's financial cycle, approximately the time between when a problem starts to form and when it becomes urgent enough to require a phone call. I had been answering those phone calls for 7 years. I knew the pattern the way you know the pattern of weather in the place you've lived your whole life. I called him back the next morning. "Claire," he said, picking up immediately. The immediate pickup was a data point. "Hey. How are you?" "I'm good," I said. "What's going on?" The smallest pause. "Nothing, it's been a while, right? Since we talked. I wanted to check in." "It's been 11 days, I said. "We texted 2 weeks ago." "Oh." A laugh. "Yeah. I guess I've just been thinking about you." Another pause, slightly longer. "You doing okay? You've seemed a little off-grid." Off-grid was Daniel's word for when I didn't respond to messages within 24 hours. It applied to me specifically and only to me. I had observed that Daniel himself could disappear for weeks at a time without anyone using this word. "I'm fine," I said. "What do you need, Daniel?" Silence. Then, I didn't say I needed anything. "I know. What do you need?" The pause this time was the longest yet. I had the distinct sensation of watching someone recalibrate. The breezy, check-in version of this conversation had not produced the response he was accustomed to, which was me softening the edges, asking questions, creating enough warmth in the exchange that by the time we arrived at the actual reason for the call, it felt less like asking and more like two people working on a problem together. I wasn't softening anything today. "There's a thing with the supplier," he said finally. The supplier was a man named Greg who was apparently involved in Daniel's fourth business, which was either a logistics company or a distribution network or something in between that I had never fully understood despite several explanations. "I've got a cash flow gap for about 6 weeks and I need to cover a payment or the whole deal falls apart." "How much?" I said. 18,000. "Yeah." I let the silence sit for a moment. Not for effect, I genuinely needed the moment, because even knowing this call was coming, even having prepared for it, there was a small and stubborn part of me that had hoped I was wrong. That maybe Daniel was calling to catch up. That maybe the 11 days had been coincidental. "I'm not going to do that," I said. 3 seconds of silence. Then, "What?" "I'm not going to lend you $18,000, I said. "Or any amount. I'm not going to do that anymore. Claire." His voice shifted register, the breezy gone, something more focused underneath it. "What's going on? Did something happen?" "A lot of things happened," I said. "Over the last 7 years." "I don't," he stopped. Started again. "Is this about the loan?" "Because I've been meaning to talk to you about that, the timing has just been." "It's not about the loan," I said. "Or it's not only about the loan. Daniel, I have lent or given you $89,000. Across 7 years. That's the actual number. I have it in a spreadsheet." The silence this time had a different quality than the others. Stunned, maybe, or the performance of stunned. I wasn't sure and found I didn't need to be. "That can't be right," he said. "It's right," I said. I was conservative. I rounded down anywhere I wasn't certain. The number is if anything lower than the actual total. Claire, some of that was. All of it was real money," I said. "None of it came back. I'm not calling to litigate that. I'm calling to tell you that it's not going to happen anymore. No more loans, no more transfers, no more bridge payments. I'm done." "You're done," he repeated. Like I'd said something in a language he was still translating. "Yes. Because of what?" he said, and now there was an edge coming in, not quite anger yet, but the precursor to it, the defensive sharpening that happened when Daniel couldn't see a way to turn a conversation in his favor. "Did Natalie say something? Did Mom?" "Nobody said anything," I said. "You said something. A few weeks ago. At Natalie's apartment." The silence that followed was different from all the others. It had the particular quality of someone suddenly, fully understanding what conversation they are actually in. The Instagram thing, he said. The Instagram thing, I said. Claire, that was, he exhaled. We were just messing around. That wasn't, I wasn't being serious. You were describing me to people who barely know me, I said. You used the words, pathetic failure. You said I had every opportunity and didn't do anything with it. You said this at a table where Natalie was sitting and nobody said a word to suggest it wasn't accurate. That's not, I mean, in context. What context? I said. Give me the context that makes pathetic failure a neutral observation. He didn't. I'm not angry about the word, I said, which was not entirely true but was the part one needed him to hear. I mean, I am, a little. But mostly I'm interested in what it means that you held that opinion, casually, in a room full of people, while I was, at that exact moment, in the middle of a standing bank transfer that had been running for 3 years to make sure certain people's lives were comfortable. What does that tell both of us about how this has worked? That's not fair, he said. Those are two separate things. They're not two separate things, I said. They're the exact same thing. That's what I'm telling you. He got angry. Of course he did, I'd expected that, had even made a kind of peace with it beforehand, because Daniel's anger was structurally necessary in this conversation. He needed to be angry so that he didn't have to be embarrassed, and embarrassment was the thing underneath all of it that neither of us was going to name directly. He said I was being dramatic. He said this was an overreaction to a joke. He said I'd clearly been holding on to resentment for years and that wasn't healthy. He said, and this was the one that almost got me, the one I had not fully prepared for, that I'd always made the family feel like they owed me something, that there was always a ledger somewhere, that he'd never felt like my help was freely given. I had to put my hand against the wall to steady myself. Not from emotion, from the sheer, vertiginous clarity of hearing, stated plainly, the thing that had made it impossible to ever have this conversation before now. I had made them feel like they owed me something. Not because I'd demanded repayment. Not because I'd waved the money in anyone's face or listed the amounts or asked for recognition. But because the money existed, and because they knew on some level that it existed, and because that knowledge had apparently produced, in Daniel at least, not gratitude but resentment, the specific resentment of a person who doesn't want to feel indebted and resolves that feeling by deciding the person they're indebted to isn't worth feeling indebted to. He'd called me a pathetic failure, I realized, not despite the money but partly because of it. Because making me small made the debt smaller. Because if I was a failure who hadn't done anything with my opportunities, then the money was just a rounding error in the life of someone who wasn't going anywhere anyway. Nothing to feel bad about. You're right, I said. He stopped mid-sentence. What? You're right that I had a ledger, I said. I did. I kept it, even when I told myself I wasn't keeping it. The fact that I had those numbers so precisely available this week tells you something about that. You're right. A pause. But here's the thing about a ledger, Daniel, I said. It only exists when people aren't honest about what's happening. If we'd ever had an honest conversation, if any of us had, then we wouldn't need ledgers, because everything would already be named. The reason I had a ledger is because I was the only one in this family who was counting, and I was counting in secret, because I was afraid that if I named what I was doing, one of two things would happen. Either you'd feel bad about it, or you'd stop asking. I didn't want either of those things, because I still believed, at that point, that what I was doing was love. It was love, he said, quieter now. It was, I said. It also became something else. And I'm choosing to stop the something else part. He didn't say anything for a long time. So that's it, he said finally. You're just done. I'm done with the financial part, I said. I don't know yet about the rest. I think we'd need to actually talk honestly to find out if there's a rest. And that would have to start with you watching that video and telling me what you actually think when you see it. He said he'd think about it. I said that was fine. Natalie's response was different from Daniel's, which is to say it was more precisely designed to land on exactly the spot that had always made me give in. She texted first, 3 days after the Daniel call, which meant he'd called her, which meant the two of them had had a conversation about me that I hadn't been part of, which was not surprising and was also, I noticed, not destabilizing in the way it once would have been. The text said, "Claire, I'm really worried about you. Can we talk?" I called her. I'm not sure why I called her instead of texting back, some instinct that this conversation needed to happen at full volume, in real time, without the editing that text allows. She answered immediately. Her voice had the particular softness she deployed in situations that required managing, which I recognized now the way you recognize the smell of something that's been in your house so long you've stopped smelling it, suddenly, all at once, unmistakably. "I just feel like something's really wrong," she said. "Daniel said you were upset about something. I've been so worried." "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm clear." "What does that mean?" "It means I've stopped doing something I should have stopped doing a long time ago," I said. "Or changed into something different a long time ago. And I'm in the process of making that change." "Is this about money?" she said. "Because Daniel said something about." "It's about a lot of things," I said. "The money is one of them. The video is another." Silence. Shorter than Daniel's. Natalie processed things faster than Daniel, which was one of the things I'd always admired about her. "The video," she said. "Yes. I was going to take it down," she said. "I kept meaning to." "It's been 17 days, I said. "I know. I didn't think you'd seen it." "I had," I said. Another silence. Then, "I'm sorry about what Daniel said. I should have said something." This was the moment I had been thinking about the most, in the days since Daniel's call. Because Natalie's apology was real, I believed it, in the same way I believed that her regret was real and her worry was real. Natalie's feelings were almost always genuine. The problem was never that she didn't feel things. The problem was that her genuine feelings existed in a completely separate compartment from the patterns of behavior that had shaped our relationship for 30 years, and feeling sorry about Daniel's words didn't connect, in any structural way, to the question of who she called when she couldn't cover rent. "You should have," I said. "But I also understand why you didn't. And honestly, Natalie, the thing I keep coming back to isn't what Daniel said. It's what it tells me about how I've existed in this family. You've been so good to us," she said. And she meant it. I could hear her meaning it. "I know," I said. "And I became so good to you that you stopped seeing me. Daniel sees someone who hasn't done anything interesting. You see someone who's always available. Neither of you actually sees me. And I think that happened because I made it very easy not to." Here is the thing about the conversation with Natalie that was different from the conversation with Daniel. She cried. Not manipulative crying, or if it started as manipulation, it became something more before it was over. She cried in the way of someone who has just seen something clearly for the first time and is not entirely sure what to do with the clarity. She said, "I didn't think about what it cost you." "I know," I said. "I didn't think about it because you never seemed like it cost you anything," she said. You were always fine. You always handled it. I knew it wasn't nothing, but you never showed me the nothing part, so I told myself it was okay because you were okay." This was the most accurate thing anyone in my family had ever said about the mechanism of what had happened between us. I sat with it for a moment. "That's fair," I said. "That's actually fair. I hid the cost because I thought hiding the cost was what love looked like. And I'm realizing now that all I actually taught everyone was that there was no cost. And when there's no visible cost, it's easy to forget there's a person paying it." "I'm sorry," she said again. Quieter. "I know," I said. "I also need you to know that I'm changing things. Not because I don't love you. But because the version of this where I'm invisible isn't sustainable, and it's not actually good for either of us." "Are you going to stop helping me?" she said. And there it was, underneath the apology, underneath the genuine emotion, the practical question that had been there since the beginning. Not asked with malice. Asked with the reflexive anxiety of someone whose financial safety net had just announced it was reconsidering its structure. I'm going to stop covering emergencies that wouldn't be emergencies if we'd been honest sooner, I said. I'm going to stop being a resource and start being your sister. Those are different things. I should have figured that out years ago. She didn't say anything for a long time. What does that mean practically? She said finally. It means the next time something comes up, you call me and we talk about it honestly, together, instead of you calling me in crisis and me wiring money to make the crisis go away, I said. It means I'm not your emergency fund. It means you have to build one. That's going to be hard, she said. I know, I said. I'm sorry I made it easy not to for so long. I want to pause here and say something about the period after those two conversations, because what happened internally was as important as what happened in the calls. I had expected to feel like I'd lost something. I'd been carrying the weight of this for so long that I'd half convinced myself the weight was structural to who I was, that without it, I'd be lighter but also less, somehow, that the role I'd been playing had become load-bearing in my own identity the same way it had been load-bearing in their lives. That's not what happened. What happened was sleep. I slept better in the week after those calls than I had in years, not dramatically, not the way a movie would show it, just the ordinary, unremarkable good sleep of a person who has put down something heavy and hasn't yet picked anything else up. My mornings felt different. Not easier, exactly, but more spacious. Like rooms that had been crowded with furniture that had been very gradually moved out. I also noticed, for the first time in years, how much of my mental bandwidth had been quietly occupied by my family's finances. Not in conscious hours, I wasn't sitting around tallying their needs, but in the background processing that happens below the level of awareness, the constant low hum of is Daniel okay? Is Natalie's rent covered? Is Mom's heating bill manageable? When I stopped being responsible for those things, the hum stopped. The silence it left was astonishing. I hadn't realized how loud it had been. My mother called the following week. Not about money, about me. She'd heard from Natalie and Daniel that something had shifted, and she wanted to understand what she knew couldn't be explained in someone else's telling of it. We talked for 2 hours. The real kind of 2 hours, not the managed kind, not the kind where I listened carefully and said helpful things and kept my own feelings at a reasonable volume. I told her about the 7 years. About the $214,000, which she had not known the total of and which made her go quiet in a way that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Claire, she said finally. I know, I said. I knew it was a lot, she said. I didn't know it was, she stopped. I didn't know it was that. I know you didn't, I said. I kept it from you. From everyone. I thought if I named it, it would change what it was. What did you think it was? She asked. I thought about it. Love, I said. Mostly. And also maybe the thing I was best at in this family. The one thing I could do that no one else could, that made me matter in a specific way. I think I needed that, somewhere in there. I think that's on me. My mother was quiet again. Then she said, I made you that way. You didn't make me anything, I said. I did, she said. Not on purpose. But I leaned on you because you were steady and I needed steady and I didn't ask what it cost you to be that. I should have asked. We stayed on the phone for a long time after that, not talking, just present. My mother and I have never had a lot of silence between us. She's a talker, I'm a talker, but this silence felt different from the comfortable kind. It felt like two people standing next to something that's been cleared away and looking at the space together. It has been 11 months since the video. I want to tell you what's changed, but I want to do it precisely, without the kind of narrative neatness that makes a story satisfying but less than true. Daniel and I have spoken 4 times. Each conversation has been shorter than the one before it, not because we've become hostile but because we've become honest, and honesty between Daniel and me turns out to produce shorter conversations than the managed, softened version we'd been having for years. In the most recent call, he told me the 4th business hadn't worked out. He said it with a resignation I hadn't heard in him before, not defeat, but something more grown-up than defeat, an acceptance that things sometimes don't work and the appropriate response is to reckon with that rather than immediately reframe it. He did not ask me for money. I did not offer any. We talked for 20 minutes and said goodbye with a civility that felt like the beginning of something truer than what we'd had, even if it was quieter. Natalie and I have seen each other 3 times, twice for dinner, once when she called me in an actual emergency, a health scare that turned out to be nothing but that I got in the car for anyway, because there's a difference between being a bank account and being a sister, and I'd told her I wanted to be the sister version. I was. She didn't ask me for money during the health scare and I didn't offer any, and when we sat in the hospital waiting room together, for 4 hours, she held my hand the way people hold hands when they're actually afraid, and I thought, this is what I was trying to buy with all the money, and the money could never have bought it. The real version only becomes available when the transactional version stops. My mother and I speak every Sunday. The standing transfer is gone, replaced by a specific monthly contribution to a specific expense that we've named and discussed and that has a defined structure and a defined endpoint. It took 3 conversations to build that structure, and it was uncomfortable every time, and it is better than the previous arrangement in every way I can measure. The $214,000 is not coming back. I want to say that plainly because I think some of you watching this expect a different ending to that part of the story. Some accounting, some acknowledgement, some formal reclamation of what was spent. That's not what happened. Some of it was lent, in theory, but the enforceability of a loan between family members who have never treated money as a formal matter is effectively zero, and I've spent enough of my life managing everyone else's feelings around money that I am not interested in spending more of it in a courtroom. What I got instead is harder to quantify and more valuable than any repayment schedule. I got my own life back. Here is what I mean when I say that. In the 11 months since the video, I have done something I haven't done in 7 years of being someone else's financial safety net. I have saved money that stays saved. Not money that passes through my account on its way to someone else's problem. Money that accumulates, month after month, in an account with my name on it, for my future. I also have mental space I'd forgotten I was missing. The background hum, the constant low processing of everyone else's financial state that had been running under every week of the last 7 years, is gone. The silence it left has been, in ways I did not expect, productive. I finished a certification I'd been putting off for 2 years. I started running in the mornings, not because I'd planned to but because I had mornings now, actual mornings, not just the first part of the day spent already thinking about someone else. I went on 3 trips, all of them modest, all of them entirely for myself, without calculating what they cost against what I could have contributed to someone else's rent. I am not going to tell you that any of this was easy, or that the discomfort of those conversations was a small thing. It was not a small thing. There was a version of the Daniel call that ended the relationship entirely, and I held that possibility the way you hold something fragile while deciding whether you need it. I decided I didn't know yet. That's where we still are, in the not knowing yet, which is more honest than either of the certainties would have been. I want to say one more thing directly, to whoever is watching this, because some version of it is their life right now. There is a type of giving that looks like love but functions like erasure. Not because the love isn't real, it usually is. But because the kind of giving that makes you invisible, that never gets named, that teaches the people around you that there's no cost and therefore no person behind the generosity, that kind of giving, over time, produces exactly the outcome it was trying to prevent. It produces relationships where you are a function rather than a person. Where the function can be deprecated if it's no longer performing as expected. Pathetic failure. Didn't do anything with it. Said about the invisible person behind $214,000 of quiet love. If you are that person, if you are the one whose generosity has made you invisible in the lives of people who should see you most clearly, I want you to hear this: the love was real. The cost was real. The invisibility was not inevitable. And naming what you've given is not the same as taking it back. I named it. I didn't take it back. What I took back was myself. I'd love to know, have you ever given something, money, time, energy, years of managing someone else's crisis, and had the gift turned against you? Did you say something, or did you stay quiet the way I did? Tell me in the comments. There are more of us in this position than any of us usually say. If this story landed somewhere real for you, please subscribe. There's another one coming, there's always another one coming, and I'm still here, still listening. Thank you for watching.